The Queen's cruel game. The air in the gallery was heavy with the ozone scent of high-end surveillance equipment and the metallic tang of dried blood. Rachel wiped a smear of ichor from her lip, her vision sharpening, the world shifting into high-contrast shades of gray and bruised purple. Her hunger was a living thing now, a coiled viper in her gut that pulsed in rhythm with the flicker of the overhead monitors. Across the hallway, the Queen emerged from the shadows. She moved with an unnatural, fluid grace that made the wood beneath her feet groan in protest. Her eyes, milky and ancient, were fixed on them with the detached hunger of an apex predator watching a wounded fawn. Performance, darlings, David's voice boomed from the hidden speakers, dripping with honeyed sadism. The subscribers are bored with the pouting. Give them a chase. Give them desperation. The Queen lunged. Sarah didn't think, she reacted. She shoved Rachel toward the west corridor, her own movements gaining a terrifying, jagged speed that she hadn't possessed an hour ago. They sprinted, their boots skidding on the polished parquet as the Queen's claws shredded the wallpaper behind them, carving deep, jagged furrows into the lath and plaster. Don't fight her head on. Sarah hissed, her voice breathy, desperate. She's the house enforcer. She's designed to win this engagement. I'm starving, Sarah. Rachel growled, her teeth lengthening, the vampiric instinct fighting her conscience. If I don't feed, I'm just meat. Then feed on the house, not each other. They vaulted a fallen mahogany credenza, Rachel's fingers digging into the wood, splintering it with a strength that both thrilled and horrified her. They rounded a corner, the Queen's laughter echoing like grinding glass. David's feed was relentless. Rachel could feel the gaze of 1,000 unseen voyeurs pressing against her skin, the psychological weight of their attention manifesting as a literal prickling heat. She glanced up at a hidden camera tucked behind a gilded sconce. A red tally light blinked, indifferent and hungry. Beautiful, David's voice crooned through the walls. Look at the way the light catches the panic in your eyes, Rachel. You were born for this, weren't you? Rachel snarled at the camera, her fangs fully extended now, her eyes glowing with a faint, predatory amber. She felt the surge of adrenaline, not the human kind, but something cold, sharp, and exhilarating. She wasn't just prey. She was becoming something else. He wants a show? Rachel whispered, stopping abruptly in the center of the grand ballroom. Let's give him a tragedy. Rachel, don't. Sarah grabbed her arm, but the Queen burst through the double doors, a whirlwind of velvet and malice. The Queen skidded to a halt, sensing the shift. She leveled a long, bone-white finger at them. Little dolls, the Queen rasped, her voice like wind through dead leaves. Your movements are sloppy. Your fear is unrefined. Let me prune the excess. The Queen struck, a blur of motion. Sarah ducked, using the ballroom's grand chandelier chain as a pivot point, swinging her body into the Queen's ribs. It was a move born of sheer, tactical desperation. The impact sent a shockwave through the room, but the Queen barely staggered. Rachel felt the hunger peak. It wasn't just a physical craving, it was a demand for power. She reached out, pulling at the ambient magic of the manor, the same energy David used to bind them. The shadows in the corner of the room seemed to lunge toward her call, manifesting as wisps of solidified darkness. She threw the shadow whip, a lash of ethereal ink that struck the Queen across the face. The ancient vampire shrieked, the shadow burning her skin like molten lead. You're just a puppet. Rachel screamed at the room, at the cameras, at David. And we're cutting the strings. They didn't stop to celebrate. They didn't even stop to breathe. They bolted through the service tunnels behind the ballroom, the smell of damp earth and rot filling their lungs. Sarah slammed a heavy iron bolt into place as they reached the service stairs. She leaned her forehead against the freezing metal, her breath coming in ragged, vampiric gasps. That wasn't supposed to work, she muttered, her eyes wide. The magic, it responded to you. It's part of me, Rachel said, her voice shaking. She looked at her hands. They were trembling, but not with fear. It was the thrill of the hunt. She felt the Queen's presence on the other side of the door, the rhythmic thud-thud of a predator pacing. "We aren't dying here, Sarah. We're going to be the reason he loses everything." Exquisite, David's voice returned, though it sounded sharper now, less amused. "The stakes have been raised. Let's see if you can survive the second act." The walls groaned. The architecture began to shift, the hallway lengthening, the doors rearranging themselves into a labyrinthine puzzle. The manor was reacting to their defiance, actively working to keep them trapped in the Queen's hunting ground. "He's changing the maze," Sarah said, her voice turning into that of a cold, calculating strategist. She stood up, her posture rigid, her focus shifting from the terror of their situation to the mechanics of their environment. "He wants us separated. He wants us isolated so the Queen can tear us apart one by one." "So we don't separate," Rachel said, her gaze hardening. "No," Sarah countered, a dangerous glint in her eyes. "We separate, but we make him think we're lost. We feed the cameras exactly what they want to see, two frightened girls running for their lives, while we map the dead zones. If we can find the nodes where his broadcast loses strength, we can blind him." Rachel looked at the Queen's shadow flickering under the heavy oak door. She realized then that the transformation wasn't a death sentence. It was an evolution. They were being forged in the heat of David's cruelty, and the weapon he had created was beginning to sharpen its blade against its master. "Let's give them a chase they'll never forget," Rachel said. She kicked the door open, not to run, but to hunt. The Queen was waiting, and for the first time, the predatory gaze didn't belong to the hunter. It belonged to them. The observation chamber, a cold, circular room of reinforced glass and Victorian-era iron, hummed with the high-pitched whine of active circuitry. Above them, a dozen lenses tracked their every flicker of fear, the red LEDs glowing like predatory eyes in the dim light. Rachel huddled against the wall, her nails digging into the stone until her fingers bled. The blood didn't just pool, it beaded, shimmering with a faint, bioluminescent violet, the telltale sign of her turning. Across from her, Sarah was pacing, her movements jagged, animalistic. She was trying to maintain a grip on her logic, but the hunger was a physical pressure behind her eyes, a drumbeat synced to the rhythm of the manor's unseen heart. "Stop," Rachel hissed, her voice raspy. "You're burning calories we don't have." That's what he wants. He wants us frantic. He wants the struggle segment for the subscribers. Sarah stopped, her back to the glass. She looked at her own hands, then at the Queen, who stood just outside the chamber, leaning against the doorframe like a bored debutante at a gala, a jagged silver blade twirling lazily between her porcelain white fingers. "We have to choose," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the surveillance gear. "She said it, Rachel. If we don't pick one of us to discard, she turns the chamber into a vacuum. She's giving the audience a choice of sacrifice. I'm not killing you, Sarah. And I'm not killing you." Sarah's gaze shifted to the ceiling, to the nearest camera lens. She stared directly into the glass, her expression hardening. "He thinks he's writing the script. He thinks we're just lines of code in human skin." The Queen tapped the glass with the tip of her blade. Clink. 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 10 minutes remain in the segment, the Queen sang, her voice devoid of warmth. The audience is voting. The martyr's exit is currently trending at 64%. "Rachel, darling, if you don't take the blade and end her, I'll simply let the room fill with saltfire. It's a very popular way to die. Very theatrical." Rachel stood up, her joints popping with a sickening, wet sound. She looked at the Queen, then caught Sarah's eye. A silent conversation passed between them, a desperate, telepathic shorthand born of their shared trauma and the burgeoning, dark magic now pulsing through their veins. She's waiting for a kill, Rachel thought, projecting the intent rather than speaking it. She's waiting for the performer's betrayal arc. Then we give them a plot twist, Sarah replied. Sarah slumped, dropping to her knees, clutching her head as if in agony. She looked toward the primary camera, her eyes wide, glassy with forced tears. I can't take it anymore, she sobbed, her voice perfectly pitched for the microphones. Rachel, please. I'm scared. Do it. Save yourself. It was a performance of Shakespearean desperation. The Queen's smirk widened. She leaned in, her ear pressing against the glass to catch every word of the inevitable breakdown. Yes, the Queen whispered, breathless. Give them the tragedy. Give them the grief. Rachel lunged. She didn't move toward Sarah. She moved toward the glass. In a blur of unnatural speed, Rachel slammed her shoulder against the iron frame of the door, not aiming for the Queen, but for the heavy electrical conduit running along the baseboard, the main feed for the cameras and the atmospheric sensors. She channeled every ounce of her hunger, every scrap of her ancestral rage into her grip, ripping the cabling from the wall with a shower of blue sparks and ozone. The chamber lights flickered and died. The hum vanished. For a heartbeat, the room was pitch black. What are you doing? The Queen shrieked, her voice suddenly losing its poise, replaced by a shrill, manic edge. Sarah moved in the dark, silent as a hunting cat. She didn't have the blade, but she had the geography of the room mapped. She had spent the last hour tracking the Queen's breathing, the way her heels clicked on the floor, the exact cadence of her arrogance. Sarah found the latch to the chamber door, the one piece of hardware that hadn't been deactivated by the surge, and yanked it open. As the Queen turned to slash at the dark, Sarah tripped her, a simple, brutal maneuver that sent the vampire sprawling. There are no cameras here now, Sarah hissed, leaning over the fallen Queen. No audience. No votes. Just you, and the things you've done. The Queen scrambled back, her eyes wide with a different kind of terror, the terror of a performer whose stage has been dismantled. He'll kill you for this. He'll reset the entire floor. You're just meat, you're just dolls. Rachel emerged from the shadows, her eyes glowing with a faint, violet luminescence. She reached down, picking up the silver blade the Queen had dropped. She held it not with a killer's intent, but with the cold, calculated precision of a surgeon. We aren't dolls anymore, Rachel said, her voice resonant, vibrating with the power of the island's ancient, dark soil. We're the ones who own the names carved in those walls. And we're tired of the show. The Queen lunged, a desperate, feral strike. Rachel didn't parry. She stepped into the Queen's guard, the silver blade finding the seam of the Queen's neck with effortless, practiced motion. It wasn't a death blow, they needed information, but it was enough to silence the Queen's screams. As the Queen collapsed, clutching her throat, the manor groaned. The walls themselves seemed to shudder, the foundation shifting as if the house were angry, as if the show was being forcibly interrupted by its own protagonist. Sarah grabbed Rachel's arm, her grip tight, her knuckles white. The reset, Sarah muttered, looking at the ceiling, where the empty, dead camera mounts hung like severed limbs. He's going to bring the whole house down on us just to stop the feedback loop. We have to move. Now. They stepped over the writhing, defeated form of the Queen and sprinted into the dark, labyrinthine hallways. They weren't just fleeing anymore. They were navigating a landscape of their own making, fueled by the terrifying knowledge that if they reached the center of the manor, they wouldn't just be breaking the cycle, they would be burning David's empire to the ground, one digital memory at a time. Behind them, the hallway began to ripple, the wallpaper peeling away to reveal the raw, ancient stone of the island underneath, pulsating with the same dark, rhythmic beat that now lived in their own hearts. They had stopped being the victims of the plot. They were now the authors of the collapse. The Queen lunged, her movements a blur of predatory grace, her fingers elongated into ivory-white talons that sliced through the stale air. Rachel didn't try to parry, she dove, her new, unnatural reflexes snapping into place. She felt the heavy, metallic heat of her vampiric blood surging, a rhythmic thrumming in her veins that acted like a metronome for her survival. She's anticipating the strike. Rachel shouted, rolling across the mahogany floorboards of the gallery. Sarah was already moving, sliding behind a heavy, velvet-draped pedestal. She didn't look like the panicked girl from the cellar anymore. Her eyes, darkened by the transformation, were fixed on the cameras embedded in the crown molding. She saw the tiny, rhythmic pulses of red light, David's digital pulse. "She's not just hunting us," Sarah hissed, her voice cold and analytical. "She's waiting for the dramatic beat. She wants a struggle, a climax for the subscribers." The Queen halted, her head cocking at an impossible angle. She let out a sound, a jarring mix of a mechanical whir and a feral hiss. She wasn't just a monster, she was a stage manager with fangs. She spun toward Rachel, who had backed herself into a dead-end corridor lined with flickering antique lamps. "Perform, little moth," the Queen purred, her voice overlapping with a faint, synthesized echo of David's own mocking cadence. "The audience is bored. They want blood, not running." Rachel felt the hunger, the black, suffocating void that had been gnawing at her sanity since the turning. She fought the urge to give in, to tear through the Queen's throat just to stop the noise. Instead, she locked eyes with Sarah across the room. A silent language had formed between them over the last few hours, a desperate shorthand of subtle nods and measured breaths. Rachel crouched, tensing her muscles, and then exploded forward, not at the Queen, but at the wall. With a roar that surprised even her, Rachel slammed her fist into the ornate plasterwork. She didn't aim for the structural beam. She aimed for the hidden cluster of fiber optic cables pulsing behind the wallpaper, the nervous system of David's broadcast. The wall shattered in a spray of dust and sparks. The Queen shrieked, a sound that was half scream, half feedback loop. The room plunged into flickering darkness as the camera feed stuttered, the red lights dying out one by one. "Now!" Rachel screamed. Sarah didn't hesitate. She threw the heavy silver candlestick she'd been holding, not at the Queen, but into the center of the chandelier above the monster's head. The crystal structure buckled, crashing down in a cascade of shattered glass and jagged metal. The Queen was pinned, her pale, unnatural flesh shredded by the debris, her connection to the Red Room momentarily severed as the tech she relied upon was crushed beneath the weight of the manor's own history. "She's disconnected," Sarah whispered, stepping out of the shadows. Her hands were trembling, but her posture was rigid with victory. "She's just a vampire now. No cameras. No scripts. No David." The Queen struggled, her limbs thrashing, but she was trapped. The manor seemed to shudder, a deep, tectonic groan vibrating through the floorboards. The lights throughout the hallway strobed violently, a digital seizure. "What did we do?" Rachel asked, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her skin was pale, glowing faintly with the residue of her transformation. She looked at her hands, the veins still dark, the claws still sharp, and felt a terrifying rush of agency. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't the prey. A voice tore through the silence, amplified by the house's speakers. It wasn't the Queen's. It was David's, distorted, layered, and utterly livid. Disruptive. Unprofessional. And frankly, boring. The hallway lights slammed to a blinding, surgical white. The manor began to tilt, the geometry of the architecture shifting with a nauseating lurch. A hidden door in the floor opened, revealing a dark, yawning abyss that pulsed with a rhythmic, bioluminescent rot. David's voice laughed, a sound that seemed to come from inside their own skulls. "You think you're writing the script now? You think because you broke a few cables, the play is over? You're just stagehands, Rachel. And I'm the director." Suddenly, the floor beneath the trapped Queen dissolved entirely. She didn't have time to scream before she was dragged into the darkness below, vanished into the guts of the manor. The gap closed instantly, leaving the floor smooth and pristine, as if nothing had ever happened.